Hello, nice to be here. My name is Clifford Young, and I'll be talking today on election polling and our experience in the U.S. During this last electoral cycle, 2012, where there were a lot of methodological innovations that are very pertinent to the research world. Two definitions. The first definition is election polling. When I say election polling, I'm talking about research, qualitative or quantitative, done before, during, or after the elections to understand behavior or to predict the elections. The second definition is polling. It's very analogous to surveying, but it's in the context of political and election work. A poll is the top of our heads, and so before they had polls, they'd count the top of the heads to know where the candidates fell. So polling is surveying. So first and foremost, we pollsters, that is, we poll, and we call ourselves pollsters, we often like to think of ourselves as what? Excuse me? As the movie stars or the superstars of market research, right? We're the individuals that are on the media, talking heads, talking about elections and other sorts of things. Typically for our firms and for the industry, we're very public. Our polls are very public. And we, in our heart of hearts, we like to think of ourselves as movie stars, even if we're perhaps not. But are we really? I put that question in there, are we really? And I would actually say no, actually we're not. We're actually nerds. We're actually data geeks, very concerned about numbers. We live and breathe something we call total survey error. We're worried about the error and bias in research. We talk about margin of error. We talk about non-sampling error like non-response bias or coverage bias or measurement error. That is, am I writing that question in a way that's robust and that people will understand and that won't bias our results? And ultimately, the question is, why are we like that? Why? Well, it's a very simple reason. Because what we do, and when we're talking about election polling, we do something that is highly visible in the public space. Everyone sees it. It is one of the few cases in research, market research specifically, that we actually have a benchmark, an external benchmark to validate how we did. Imagine that. High bar, high risk, high reward. This is a picture of Truman, who was a president of ours in the 1940s and 50s, and he's holding up a paper saying that his adversary was going to win. Ultimately, he won. So if you get it right, you're awesome. If you get it wrong, you're a dog. This is why we're worried about error, okay? And ultimately, speed is critical. So we're not doing things that take months. We can't do an autopsy on the election. We have to do polls very quickly because the electoral environment's very dynamic and changing. So it's robustness of our technique on the one hand, but with speed. And ultimately, and this is where I think it's, as a methodologist and a research practitioner, election polling's very important because it's ultimately a proof of concept. It's a proof that your approach worked or didn't work. And even if it didn't work well, you can go and evaluate why it didn't work well. And that will be the focus of my presentation, talking about new methodologies applied to the 2012 US presidential elections, and looking at whether they worked or they didn't. They worked. But if they worked or they didn't, and the reasons why. Okay, so once again, US elections as a proof point. Now, it's become quite cliche. Everyone's talking about big data. Oodles and oodles and oodles of information everywhere. We can't even make sense of it to some extent. I think most fundamentally right now, what we're seeing is that our clients, their expectations are changing. They no longer are expecting that single piece of data, that single poll. Their expectations have changed because they can enter Twitter or Facebook, look on Google, and get things instantaneously. So changing expectations in this big data environment. They want data now, not tomorrow. In addition, once again, the context about the 2012 election, where there might have been 1 or 2 polls done in the 1960s or 1970s and 1980s per month, that spiked to over 100 in the last electoral cycle. 100 polls in a month. We had 17,000 polls approximately done during the electoral year in 2012. 17,000. Now there's lots of implications for that. On the one hand, we had the rise of what I call the modelers, and Nate Silver. Nate Silver's famous. He's a person that takes in data and analyzes it and projects what will happen in the election because there's so much information. But also, in a context with 17,000 polls, how do you make your client relevant, differential? How do you, in my case, Ipsos, or in someone else's case is another research firm, how do you make your poll relevant when there are 17,000 others competing against you? Not 17,000, but 7 firms, but 17,000 polls. So this is the context we found ourselves in. In addition, within this context, what was old 2 decades ago is very old today. So we got to the point in this electoral cycle where information that just was a half day old, was out of date, was irrelevant, that didn't matter in terms of content for our clients. And I'll come back and talk about that. So the question is, where you have massive amounts of information, how do you make your information differential? This is the context we found ourselves in. Okay? So Thomson Reuters is our client. We're still working with them, but we worked with them during the 2012 election cycle. In November of 2011, I had my presentation ready. I walked in like this, ready to present to them. I had a very traditional proposal. We would do 1 telephone poll per month leading up to the election, and 6 weeks before we do 1 poll per week, and 1 week before we do 3 polls. And I sat down, presented, and they go, no, we're not interested in that. And I go, well, okay, so what are you interested in? And our client goes, it's like this, Cliff. I don't think you get it. I want to be able to dip my hand into a continuous stream of data at any time of the day, at any moment, and pull out information to give to my reporters. I don't want to wait for that discrete poll a few days from now. I want it now. It's like a data stream. Get it? In the new data world, don't you get it, Cliff? There's data everywhere, always. That's what I want. And you're like, okay. I want to show visuals. This whole thing about asking and describing a concept, a campaign ad, that's ridiculous. We have the internet. We have mobile platforms. I want to show things. I want to show granularity because elections in the US are not defined in aggregate. They're defined at the state level. They're defined by very specific micro-targets like Hispanics, that is Spanish-speaking minority population in the US. It's defined by like veterans of foreign wars. It's defined by those that live in rural areas. I want to be able to target them and look at them because they're the ones that are going to define the election. And once again, my basic challenge is that in a 24/7 news cycle, if I put a poll into the field today and get it tomorrow, it's old. I want to be able to parse the days, that is, separate within a day and get data right when things happen. That's what I want. And we're like, that sounds awesome. But how are we going to do it, actually? Okay. The point being, and I think the point I want to emphasize here, and there's been a lot of discussions about what we did in some other firms in the US, is that it was the market that drove us. It was our client that drove us to innovate. It wasn't us, because we were all fine with the traditional methods. It was our clients that said, no. I need to be relevant in this new world. And to be relevant, I want these sorts of things. I don't know how you're going to do it, but that's what I want. Okay? So how ultimately did we meet their needs? How did we? Well, first and foremost, for the 12 months leading up to the election, We did 163,000 interviews. 163,000. That's a lot of interviews. That's a lot of stuff. We did it every day at every moment of the day. We were always in the field. At the end of election, on election day, we did an exit poll of 40,000 individuals, 40,000, that they would be able to use to project what the results, but also to have news stories afterwards. And ultimately, we had a platform that allowed us to change the questionnaire from minute to minute if need be. All we go in there is re-script it, and the questionnaire would be changed. There'd be new questions given changing events. Okay? And how do we do that? We ultimately, and I'll emphasize this in a second, we in the election polling field, that is, those of us who are pollsters, tend to be very traditional. We're laggards, usually not innovators, in the market research field. We use very traditional methods. So in the US, we use telephone interviewing. Maybe in Turkey, it's face-to-face still for election polling, or maybe face-to-face and telephone. So we don't like to change that much. But in this specific case, we did it online, which even in the US for election work is very controversial. But we didn't just use online panels. What we did was we took a platform, a technology developed by Ipsos, but being developed by other firms as well in the market more generally, where we took traditional panels. One panel was the Ipsos panel. There are 7 or 8 other commercial panels in the United States. We combined them, but we also river sampled, that is, we pulled people off that continuous data stream in the virtual world off of over 300 different websites. We call those non-panel sources, about 300 or so. So we combined all that in a mix, a sample mix. A couple things there. First and foremost, what we know is that panels are and I'll be a little bit radical on this, are dying, or they're becoming, the weight of them is becoming less important in the United States. People tend to aggregate on the internet in the virtual world in naturally occurring ways, and to participate in something with an incentive is increasingly becoming difficult. So the first thing is combining multiple sources was first the best way to increase our total possible universe of respondents. So in any given year with this mixed blended approach at Ipsos, we hit 22 million unique respondents. So if our client wants a huge data set, huge survey, this is the way to boost up the numbers. Because otherwise our panel would get tired, right? 163,000 interviews, of course, of the year, plus 40,000, 200,000 interviews. This is a way to increase it. In addition, the size. In addition, and perhaps most importantly in my mind, and I will show you that, is that this mix of different sources reduces the inherent bias of any one source. So one panel might have more men, another panel might have more women, one panel might have more minorities, another one more Republicans, another one more Democrats. And if you take it and put it all together, it kind of works out. Okay? Okay. We had detractors. This is a very close friend of mine. Not so close, but a competitor, let's say. But an example of the critics in the market for those of us doing internet and online polling. These aren't traditional methods. They're not true random probability samples. I mean, you have the same sort of debates in every country, and so you have the same sort of debate in the United States. Lots of detractors. And what we did, and actually the others in the market research field that were doing online polling at this time, is that we did lots of research on research. Because once again, we're nerds. We're worried about the robustness of the sample. We want to get the elections right. We don't want to get them wrong. So lots of research looking at different ways to put the sample together to be unbiased and robust. That's me talking, of course. I talked a couple times on it. We pushed our own, we as an industry, pushed our professional association to accept online polling in some ways, okay? But really what we did is that we showed how it worked in practice. And right now I'm going to show you 4 different cases of this research platform at work. The first one's of a video, a visual. Our client wanted visuals. They wanted to show things. It's of a campaign video during the primaries. In the United States, you have primaries and a general election. Primaries are to elect the candidate for the given party. So the Republicans had a primary this last electoral cycle, and they're not done nationally. They're done in every state. So we have 50 different primaries. Primaries are also interesting because they're kind of like carnivals or circuses with strange, bizarre figures involved. There's lots of sideshows and drama by the uniqueness and the strangeness of the characteristics of each candidate. And here I want to show a video that we ran that came out, and the very next day we had it in the field and we were testing it for Reuters. This is Kane. Yes. Okay, that was insane, wasn't it insane? I mean, that was a very interesting character in this carnival of characters in the Republican primary. But we were able to take a specific video that came out virally on YouTube, pinch it and test it in the next day and have results that next day. And this is what we kind of showed. We were able to do word clouds, and get actually very granular, more qualitative-like information from it. Smoking, cigarette, interesting. The Republicans, interesting, kind of different. Democrats, stupid, ridiculous, weird. Interesting how the two different bases play it. Ultimately, people were kind of split. Yeah, it didn't really help them, didn't really hurt them. It was pretty bizarre, ultimately. But it's a great example of how we could take visuals, take it as the campaign's going, and before you even have reactions, even from talking heads about the ad, actually to have polling data on it. The next example is actually an initiative by Reuters. What they wanted to do was they wanted to be able to look at specific micro-targets. One of the reasons we were doing 163,000 interviews during the electoral cycle. Because ultimately, we knew about this election. This election was going to be a game of inches. It was going to be a close election. Now, we know based upon our experience around the globe in over 300 elections that incumbents, that is, those candidates that are in power, that are running again like an Obama, have almost a threefold chance, a 3 times chance to win over non-incumbents. And so we knew that Obama probably would win, but it'd be very close. And probably small little differences with specific micro-targets would make the difference. So, for instance, minority vote, blacks and Hispanics. Very important for Obama in 2008. Would they be important for him in 2012? And so together with Reuters, we built what we call the American Mosaic, which was actually a tool. It's actually an interactive tool that you could do crosstabs with this 163,000 interviews. It was open to the public, so anyone could look at it. It was completely open. We were completely transparent. It was basically, though, designed for their journalists to write stories. There's just a bunch of blah, blah, blah. You can't see anything. Everything's fuzzy. But those are lots of variables that you can cross with lots of things, do anything you want. But ultimately, the point is, here's an example of Hispanics that ultimately Hispanics were perhaps the reason that Obama won. He got a big chunk of the vote, and they're only 14% of the US population, so a huge sample allows us to look at them in a very granular way with certainty. And what we're seeing here is big leads for Obama over Romney. They tend to be Democratic over Republican. GOP's Republican, Dem is Democrat. Just an example of the sort of things that were done, and the largeness of the data set allowed us to do a lot of granularity, but in an interactive way with a tool that allowed us to look at these crosstabs. In addition, we were able, because we were in the field every day and we could change a questionnaire at a moment's notice, we were able to very effectively and efficiently poll on events like debates, okay? And this is the first debate, which Obama didn't do very well on at all. We were able to get basically people's reaction as to who won. You could see that Mitt Romney, 50 to 28, was thought to be the winner of that debate. Very important, we had that out the morning the next day. The morning the next day, and even had some partial data the night of, okay? And what we were able to do is, what we saw, that debate had an initial effect. Obama's the blue, Romney's the red. It brought Romney up for a while. And so our day-to-day polling, not only were we one of the first polls to come out with the actual results of the debate, we were the first poll the 2 days after, because who would poll 2 days after if you're doing one poll a week and you have very scarce resources? We did, and we were able to track the precipitous decline in Obama post-debate. Just an example of what could be done. Lastly, 40,000 interviews done on the last day of the election, or the election day, I guess, election day, where we come up with the profile of the voters, who they voted for and who they didn't. And once again, confirming again that Obama in yellow, I just put the yellow there, did very well among young people and minorities. This polling data just confirms that. Look at that, a 93% lead among blacks, a 42% lead among Hispanics. Very, very well among these specific populations. And in addition, given the fact that we had such a large platform we were running this off of, we were able to get estimates for every state, especially the swing states. What's a swing state? It's those states that are in play. Some states always go Republican. Other states always go Democrat. Some states go back and forth. And so in the back and forth states like Florida, we were able to poll daily there. And what we found out was very, very interesting. Ultimately, the Obama campaign, using big data, using lots of data sets that they put together, and modeling those data sets to get exactly at their target, didn't touch more people during the election. Actually, the Romney and the Obama campaign touched the equal numbers of people, about the same number of people. It's just that the Obama campaign touched their people, young minorities, much more than the rest of the electorate. Now, think of it in terms of efficiency. They only spoke to those who would vote for them and had to go out and vote, whereas Romney, they kind of talked with everyone. So once again, gives us an idea, an insight into why the elections and electoral results happened, but with large data sets and large data. Okay? So ultimately, how did internet polls perform? What's very, very interesting is if you were to Google internet polling 2 years ago, you would only get negative, pejorative statements. This is crud, ridiculous. This isn't the way we should do research. If you Google now, all you'll see is positive mentions for the most part. As a class, there were about 4 of us actually, if you include Ipsos. We did better than the traditional polling, that is the telephone polling. They were on average, were off about 2.5%, and we were off about an average of 1.5. So not that big of a difference, but a good enough proof point that should suggest that internet polling, something that hadn't been accepted before, is here to stay. And so ultimately, what did we learn? First and foremost, online blended sampling works, at least in the US context. We have to be careful about that. We can talk about the implications for Turkey. Lots of papers. We have a lot of papers. Our colleagues and other firms have lots of papers. This week is the US a conference of the industry conference called the American Association of Public Opinion Research. There's probably 25 different papers comparing traditional methods with new methods. So there's an explosion in our industry in the US of accepting alternative methodologies in a very traditional field. And we see that not only in practice, but we see that subsequently in our academic conferences. In addition, I would just say it's the rise of the internet pollsters. Over the next 2 electoral cycles, the old traditional gold standard of the telephone probably won't be around. or you'll see in the very rare settings, because doing it online is much cheaper, and we can get it right and do much cooler things and provide much better content in a speedier and more timely way than you can with a very expensive and questionable gold standard in telephone interviewing. Lastly, I mean, this is the whole theme of the conference, I guess, big data, but continuous data streams. The one way you become relevant, at least in the media setting, I'm talking about a media client, Thomson Reuters, is that, okay, we become relevant if we're always there. If we're always there, we're fine. We'll be into the field and out before anyone else, okay? And I say here, it's all about continuous data streams. So the cost per widget that is respondent has declined so much, and the robustness of the polls has increased so much that we can be there all the time, and that allows us to do many other sorts of things with not just media clients. I mean, we're using this platform now to do market estimates. We're using this platform. There was a healthcare reform that happened a few years ago, Obamacare it's called. And it's being implemented in practice today, next few months. And we'll be able to have estimates at the state level as this policy unfolds. So lots of very, very exciting possibilities with this new platform. So that's it. This is our experience with election polling in the US, innovations there, and hopefully it's relevant to market research in general. Thank you.